25 pounds. That's what my patient gained in 6 months, despite doing everything right. She was eating well, getting regular exercise, and even meditating to manage her stress. And her labs looked pretty normal, other than some metabolic disorder. And yet her body wasn't cooperating. If this sounds familiar, here's what her doctors missed. I'm Dr. Hilary Lynn, Stanford-trained longevity physician, and I see this pattern every week. Unexplained weight gain, stubborn fatigue, mood changes, all in people who are trying to do everything right. And today we're uncovering why. And this is not another lecture about diet and exercise. Your endocrine system is like a delicate symphony. In modern life, it's been sneaking in some very unwanted instruments. So the hormone receptors throughout your body, billions of them, are getting picked by these chemical lockpickers hiding in the last places you'd expect. And even my most health-conscious patients are shocked when we uncover the real culprits. By the end of today's episode, you'll have a practical framework for spotting these hidden disruptors. Include 3 big factors that you were probably exposed to just this morning. You'll also learn the surprising truth about timing versus dose and why your morning routine might matter most. And I'll be giving you a practical framework and protocol that works whether you have 10 minutes or 10 weeks to implement these changes. I want to give you a no BS guide to what real clean living means and to really work smarter rather than work harder. Before we dive into what's disrupting your hormones, let me show you this analogy that helps people understand this incredible system. Think of your endocrine system like a sophisticated smart home network, but instead of just one Alexa or Google Home hub, you've got billions of smart devices all communicating seamlessly. Your hypothalamus in your brain is like your main smart home hub, constantly monitoring conditions throughout the house. Temperature too high, light levels too low, energy usage spiking. It notices everything. And your pituitary gland acts as your primary voice assistant, sending specific commands to the other glands: turn up the heat, dim the lights, adjust the energy consumption. And here's what it gets fascinating. Every cell in your body is like a small smart device with its own set of sensors. Just as your smart thermostat has specific sensors for temperature, each cell has specialized hormone receptors. Some cells are like smart lights, responding to daily rhythm signals, while others are like smart thermostats, managing energy use. And just as your smart home devices need clean, clear signals to function properly, your cells need unambiguous hormone signals to do their jobs properly. So here are 3 key principles that can help you understand why this is also important and why endocrine disruptors are so harmful. First, we have the signal interference problem. Imagine trying to give your Alexa a command, but there's static in the system. Maybe it hears dim the lights as trim the lights. Your hormone receptors face a similar challenge. Recent research has shown that certain environmental chemicals are like digital interference, sending signals similar enough to real hormones that your cells can't tell the difference. It's not just noise, it's misleading information that your cells act on. I know when I'm going to sleep, I have this cool home system set up where I can be like, hey, Google, turn off all the lights. And that's my Google right now saying that it can't identify the Wi-Fi network. That's hilarious. Hey, Google, turn all lights on. You might want to check the modem or router connection. So you could get similar problems with your smart body system as well. The second problem is the timing priority protocol. Your smart home system likely has routines. Morning commands are going to be different from evening ones. You can set these up like automations in your smart home system. Your endocrine system works the same way, but with much higher stakes. Research shows that hormone receptor sensitivity varies dramatically throughout the day. A small disruption during your morning cortisol peak can have more impact than a larger disruption at night. Just like how a command to your smart coffee maker matters a lot more at 7 a.m. than 7 p.m. Just to make up an example. Then a third problem is the network cascade effect. So when one smart device malfunctions, it can trigger a chain reaction through your entire system. Your hormone network operates similarly, but with way more complexity. Researchers have mapped out how disruption of one hormone pathway, let's just say thyroid signaling, can cascade through the system, affecting cortisol patterns, which then impact insulin sensitivity. One glitch can ripple through your entire metabolic network. I've treated many patients who deal with the after effects of these problems. For example, I had a patient who had pretty good thyroid labs, but she had all the classic symptoms of low thyroid function. The breakthrough came when we realized that her cells weren't receiving the hormone signals correctly. It's like having a really good Wi-Fi signal, but devices that can't properly decode it. The culprit were environmental compounds that were subtly altering her cellular receivers. These are called endocrine disruptors. This is why traditional hormone testing often misses the full picture. You can have normal hormone signals, a strong signal, but if the cellular receivers are compromised, the message won't get through. It's like having full bars on your phone, but garbled audio on your calls. The latest research from endocrine labs is revealing just how sophisticated and unfortunately vulnerable this system is. We're discovering that certain endocrine disrupting compounds can affect receptor sensitivity long after exposure, just like smart devices getting stuck in the wrong mode, even after the interference is gone. But don't worry, there is an empowering part to all of this. Understanding your endocrine system as a network can help us protect it intelligently. Just as you can optimize your smart home system by setting up routines, eliminating interference, setting up Wi-Fi hub extenders, and upgrading your security, we can optimize your hormone health. Now that you understand how your endocrine system works, let's talk about why it's struggling in our modern world. It turns out that we today are exposed to more novel chemicals before breakfast than our great-grandparents encountered in an entire year. If you think back to our smart home analogy, imagine you suddenly introduce 10,000 new devices to your home network, not just the standard smart bulbs and thermostats, but experimental prototypes your system had never encountered before. That's essentially what we're doing to our endocrine systems every day. The numbers tell a really compelling story. Endocrine disruption has contributed to problems such as a 50% drop in sperm counts, 15 times increase in early puberty onset, and some girls are even starting to develop breasts as early as age 6. We have a dramatic rise in thyroid conditions, affecting up to 15% of certain populations, and metabolic disorders like diabetes and obesity are appearing in younger and younger children. But here's what fascinates me as a physician. This isn't just about toxins or pollution in the traditional sense. Some of the most significant hormone disruptors are hiding in products that are marketed as natural or supposedly clean. Even that lavender essential oil you're diffusing. Studies showed that it can have more estrogenic activity than certain synthetic chemicals that we actively avoid. And I want to put in a quick note about estrogen. So estrogen is not just a female hormone as it's often portrayed. In fact, estrogen signaling is crucial for everyone's health. It's essential for bone density in both men and women. It plays a key role in insulin sensitivity. It affects cognitive function, your mood regulation, and your muscle recovery after exercise. So remember that smart home system? Estrogen receptors are like premium smart devices with multiple functions. They don't just control one thing, they influence dozens of different cellular processes, almost like a hub. And just like a high-end smart device, they're sophisticated enough to respond to very subtle signals. That sensitivity has served us well for dozens of generations, but now it's becoming our Achilles heel. Here's what makes our modern environment so challenging for this ancient system. First, we have unprecedented chemical complexity. So remember, our body evolved to handle the occasional plant estrogen in your diet, but now it's facing synthetic compounds that can be up to 1,000 times more potent. It's like trying to run modern apps on a vintage computer. This system wasn't designed for this level of input. We also have the timing disruption. Our ancestors lived by the sun's rhythm because we didn't have artificial lighting. But now the artificial light, the shift work, and 24/7 connectivity are scrambling our biological clocks. This matters because hormone sensitivity follows strict daily patterns. A disruption at 8 a.m. can have vastly different effects than the same exposure at 8 p.m. The third problem is combination effects. We're not just dealing with single exposures. We're facing complex chemical cocktails. Recent research has shown that combinations of common compounds can have thousands of times more impact than single individual exposures. It's like the difference between a single off-key note and an entire orchestra playing in the wrong key. So this evolutionary mismatch explains why we're seeing hormone-related health issues in populations we'd least expect, even in athletes who have been healthy their entire lives. So remember that patient I mentioned at the start, the one who gained 25 pounds despite doing everything right? She's certainly not alone. I'll bet you or someone you know has had a similar experience. I see this all the time in my practice, a pattern of health issues that perfectly matches what research is telling us about endocrine disruptor exposure. Here's a little bit of the latest science showing how these chemicals are affecting our health. So think of your endocrine system like your body's orchestra conductor, coordinating everything from metabolism to reproduction. Endocrine disrupting compounds are essentially sending fake conductor signals, and the health consequences are profound. In reproductive health, we have particularly striking effects. Male fertility, like we mentioned, has dropped 50% in the last half a century, and endocrine disruptors are thought to have a significant role. Women exposed to higher levels of BPA are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. And prenatal phthalate exposure is changing reproductive development in both boys and girls. And unfortunately, these effects can persist from generation to generation. What one pregnant woman is exposed to today can affect her great-grandchildren. I see this a lot with couples who are struggling with infertility. They might be doing everything right and are pretty healthy, but unfortunately, elevated levels of phthalates and PFAS and other endocrine disruptors in our environment can really cause infertility issues in both the male and the female partner. This can lead to problems such as miscarriage or inability to conceive as easily. We have major effects beyond reproduction. Metabolic disruption is a major problem in today's age, and the science here explains why calories in, calories out sometimes fails. So it turns out that BPA exposure is linked to a 68% higher risk of type 2 diabetes. Phthalates are associated with insulin resistance, even in children. PFAS exposure correlates with impaired glucose tolerance and obesity. And these effects can occur at extremely low doses. We're thinking parts per million, so drops in an Olympic-sized pool. Then there's the cancer risk. This is where the research gets particularly concerning. So certain endocrine disrupting compounds are linked to hormone-sensitive cancers. BPA exposures, for example, is associated with increased breast cancer risk, and PFAS chemicals show connections to kidney and testicular cancer. And early life exposure can increase cancer susceptibility decades later. And unfortunately, not all exposures are equal for all people. Some groups face higher risks, especially developing babies and children. Because of their rapid development, this makes them especially vulnerable to endocrine disrupting compounds. Even tiny exposures can have lasting effects, and endocrine disrupting compounds will cross that placental barrier and affect development in utero. Similarly, pregnant women are very vulnerable. Endocrine disrupting compound exposure during pregnancy can affect both the mother and the child. And like we mentioned, the effects can persist across many generations. And that critical window of development is why people are particularly sensitive during this time. Also, folks who have pre-existing health conditions are more susceptible. So if you already have a metabolic issue, you may be more susceptible to further influence by endocrine disruptors. And hormone-sensitive conditions of all kinds can be exacerbated. Anything related to sex hormones, reproduction, metabolic issues, immune system challenges may also increase vulnerability. This is what makes this so challenging. We don't see the effects immediately. The problems that endocrine disruptors plant as seeds cause future health problems years, even decades later. A pregnant woman's exposure to endocrine disruptors today might not show up until her child reaches puberty, unfortunately, really early. And this is crucial. Understanding these impacts gives us the power to prevent them. So once we know where these risks lie, we can take targeted actions to protect ourselves and our families and our communities. Now I want to go over 3 big myths, because these are prevalent and unfortunately they kind of confuse the discussion around endocrine disruptors. Myth number 1, phytoestrogens are really bad hormone disrupting compounds. So I have this conversation quite often. A friend came to me saying that she wanted to live a really clean life, and she was suddenly worried about all this soy in her diet, and yet she was still using plastic containers to heat her food in the microwave. This highlights how often we focus on the wrong risks when it comes to hormone disruption. Let's look at what science actually tells us about natural compounds. With lavender oil, yes, there have been some intriguing case reports and in vitro studies suggesting that lavender oil components might have mild estrogenic and anti-androgenic properties. And there have been some cases reported of prepubertal gynecomastia in boys. However, when scientists conducted these more guideline-compliant in vivo assays, they found no significant estrogenic or androgenic activity. So the effects, when present, are generally mild and fortunately reversible. Soy isoflavones are also quite controversial, but the research is really reassuring. Clinical studies show that soy isoflavones bind preferentially to estrogen receptor beta rather than alpha and don't adversely affect thyroid function, breast tissue, or endometrial tissue in adults. They may slightly increase menstrual cycle length, but they don't prevent ovulation, and they're significantly less potent than synthetic estrogens. Think of these natural compounds as a thermostat for your hormone system. They can make subtle adjustments, but your body has sophisticated mechanisms to regulate them. Remember, thinking back back to evolution. We've adapted to be able to accept naturally occurring estrogen disruptors a little bit better than the synthetic ones that have suddenly flooded our systems in modern day living. It doesn't mean that they're completely harm-free. We should still be aware of excess amounts of lavender, tea tree oil, and soy in huge amounts if you're somebody who somehow exposes yourself to a lot. However, it's really not as big of a deal as synthetic endocrine disruptors. For example, chlorpyrifos, BPA, and phthalates. These are like throwing a whole wrench into your home's electrical system. The research shows that synthetic endocrine disruptors disrupt multiple endocrine pathways simultaneously, and they accumulate in your body fat and persist for years and can affect both hormone synthesis and signaling, and unfortunately are linked to all of those serious reproductive abnormalities and hormone-sensitive cancers that we mentioned. What makes synthetic EDCs particularly concerning is their persistence. Unlike phytoestrogens that your body can process efficiently, synthetic EDCs bioaccumulate. That BPA in your plastic containers can hang around in your fat tissue for years. Unfortunately, also, while natural compounds tend to have mild selective effects, synthetic endocrine disruptors are remarkably potent. They often affect multiple hormone systems at once at a high level. And unfortunately, they're everywhere. Pervasiveness is the main problem. We have dust samples showing that over 50% of dust just in our homes contain parabens and phthalates, and we have flame retardants in all of our furniture. And unfortunately, they can transfer from mother to child during those crucial developmental windows. So the developmental impact is huge, and it affects health for generations. To sum it up, synthetic endocrine disruptors are far more harmful and prevalent than natural ones. But if you are a pregnant woman, you probably want to be a little extra careful even about the natural endocrine disruptors. And for those of you with infants, maybe stay away from using a whole ton of soy formula because that can have higher serum levels of something called genistein. But even here, the effects are far less concerning than those of synthetic endocrine disruptors. So place your focus there. Let's use a final analogy to really bring this home. Natural hormone disruptors are like background noise in a concert hall. They're noticeable, but usually not enough to disrupt a performance. Synthetic endocrine disruptors, on the other hand, are like someone randomly changing the sheet music while the orchestra is playing. The resulting chaos affects multiple instruments and can throw off an entire symphony. Myth number 2 is that the dose makes the poison. But how can such a tiny amount matter? A lot of people ask this, and I go around saying the dose makes the poison all the time about other things. But in this case, there's a really interesting thing that happens. I know that we're used to thinking about chemical safety in simple terms. More is worse, less is better. And that's why we carefully measure medication doses and avoid concentrated toxins. But it turns out that hormone disruptors play by totally different rules, and we're starting to understand these rules through our scientific research. So remember the analogy of your endocrine system as an orchestra. Think of each hormone as an instrument playing its part at exactly the right time and volume to create a perfect harmony. When endocrine disruptors enter the picture, they're not just making things louder. It's like having a tuba suddenly playing from an entire different piece of music. Even that one instrument playing the wrong piece can completely derail their performance. Let's talk about 3 key scientific principles with real examples that matter for your health. First, we have something called the non-monotonic response, when less can do more. The clearest example comes from BPA research in labs. So science has found that at just 1 part per trillion, that's like 1 drop in 1,000 Olympic swimming pools, BPA stimulates prostate cell growth. At these ultra-low doses, it can alter breast tissue development as well. And surprisingly, some higher doses sometimes show less effect. Traditional safety testing, which starts with high doses, completely missed these low dose effects. And this isn't just unique to BPA. All kinds of different other endocrine disruptors like parabens have similar patterns with all types of hormones, thyroid, sex hormones. Sometimes the smallest exposures will cause even greater changes in hormone levels. And this is why trace amounts of endocrine disruptors in everyday products can't be dismissed as too small to matter. And something we talked about a bit already is that timing matters more than the dose. So the most dramatic real-world example comes from DES, diethylstilbestrol, which was a drug that was once prescribed to pregnant women to help them rest. It turned out that adult women who took high doses had minimal effects, and their sons and daughters who were exposed to much smaller amounts before birth developed reproductive tract abnormalities and rare cancers. It turned out that the timing of exposure during development was far more critical than the dose itself. This is repeated with modern endocrine disruptors everywhere. Prenatal exposure to phthalates, which are found in plastics and fragrances, can affect male reproductive development at levels hundreds of times lower than what would affect an adult. BPA exposures during fetal development can affect brain organization at doses that would have no noticeable effect on an adult. And early life exposure to flame retardants can permanently alter thyroid function at doses adults tolerate without obvious effect. Finally, combinations matter in unexpected ways. We mentioned this before, but recent household dust studies show why we can't look at just chemicals one at a time. A typical home contains dozens of endocrine disruptors, from phthalates to flame retardants to phenols. And when tested in combination, these chemicals tend to amplify each other's effects. So for example, a mixture of phthalates and BPA can disrupt hormone function even when individual chemicals are present at levels deemed safe. Imagine reading a textbook under flickering fluorescent lights while someone is playing heavy metal music. Either one alone might be fine and you could get through that textbook, but together it makes it impossible to concentrate. Endocrine disruptors can interact in similarly disruptive ways even at low doses. The science revolutionizes how we think about chemical safety. Traditional testing looks at one chemical at a time at high doses in adult animals. But in real life, we're exposed to complex mixtures. Exposures often happen during development, and effects can appear at surprisingly low doses. Finally, timing can matter more than the dose. Understanding these principles doesn't mean we have to panic, but it does mean we should think differently, smarter about chemical exposure, especially during pregnancy and early development. The question shouldn't be just how much is too much, but when are we most vulnerable and which exposures matter the most? Myth number 3, if it was really harmful, it wouldn't be allowed in products. Here's a startling fact. Of the roughly 85,000 chemicals registered for consumer use in the United States, the vast majority were grandfathered in under the 1976 Toxic Substances Control Act without any safety testing. Even now, our regulatory framework remains better at detecting acute poisoning rather than subtle hormonal disruption. This is like having a fire safety system that only checks for explosions, but ignores slow burning embers. Here's what our current testing actually looks at. Does this chemical cause immediate obvious harm? Does it cause problems at very high doses? And does it affect adult test subjects over a few months? But obviously, this is what we're missing. How does this chemical affect a developing fetus? What happens when it combines with other chemicals? And could it disrupt hormone signaling at very low doses? And the most important one, what are effects of years of low-level exposure, which is realistic when we expose ourselves to these common household products? Unfortunately, when a patient comes to me saying, oh, I've replaced all of my skincare products with clean alternatives, they're all proud of avoiding the most common endocrine disruptors like parabens. Unfortunately, there are replacement chemicals that are often marketed as safer alternatives that haven't been tested any more thoroughly than the chemicals they're replacing. This is what I call the chemical shuffle, swapping out one concerning ingredient for its equally untested cousin. This is an area which I find really hard to deal with, unfortunately, but just know that we are all being exposed to different chemicals. And yes, choosing cleaner alternatives is one step, but the reality is we have a lot of exposures that we can't avoid. Recent biomonitoring studies paint a sobering picture. In blood samples from average Americans, researchers consistently find parabens in 99% of people tested, phthalates in over 75%, PFAS, those forever chemicals from nonstick cookware, in 95%, and BPA and its replacements in over 90%. Think of your body as the world's most sophisticated chemistry lab. Every day, it's processing not just one or two of these compounds, but dozens. A study of household dust found an average of 45 different potential endocrine disruptors in each home tested. So your endocrine system is like an orchestra conductor trying to maintain perfect harmony while random instruments keep joining in, playing from entirely different sheets of music. This gets particularly interesting, and by interesting, I mean concerning, when we look at how chemicals get replaced. Take BPA, for example. After public concern mounted, companies proudly announced BPA-free products and switched from BPA to BPS and BPF. New research suggests, however, that these replacements may have similar effects to BPA. But hey, at least the label says BPA-free, right? This is a game of chemical whack-a-mole, except the new moles haven't been properly studied yet before popping up into your water bottle. However, this is not an episode or story about helplessness or fear. Understanding these regulatory gaps actually empowers us to make smarter choices with what we can do. When I work with my patients, I focus on 3 key principles. First is strategic avoidance. Not all exposures are created equal. Some matter far more than others, and knowing which ones to prioritize can make an enormous difference without turning your life upside down. Two, informed substitution. When we make changes, we want to make sure we're actually upgrading, not just doing a chemical shuffle. This means looking beyond marketing claims to understand what evidence actually exists for replacement ingredients. And three is systemic support. Your body has sophisticated systems for handling chemical exposures. Supporting our natural detoxification pathways can be just as important as reducing exposures, and that is the foundation of health and longevity. I know this information can feel overwhelming. When I first started studying endocrine disruptors, I remember looking in my own bathroom one morning and feeling completely paralyzed. Every product seemed suspect, and I briefly considered moving to a remote cabin with nothing but baking soda and vinegar. Spoiler, I didn't, and you don't have to either. So instead, let's talk about practical evidence-based solutions that actually move the needle on your hormone health. I've developed what I call the high impact, low stress framework because the goal isn't to become anxious about every product in your home. Stress is bad for your health, but to make strategic changes where they matter the most. Think about this as updating your home security system. You don't need to fortify every window with titanium bars just because it's the best. You just need to focus on the most common entry points and the highest value targets, and with just effective enough protection. The people who most successfully reduce their exposure to endocrine disruptors aren't the ones who make dramatic overnight changes. They're the ones who implement smart strategic shifts based on the latest science. Here's what the recent research tells us works best. First, there's the shower strategy. Recent studies have given us compelling evidence about chemical leaching in the shower, and it's not just about plastic bottles. That hot, steamy environment that we all love is actually creating what researchers called realistic use conditions that can increase the release of chemicals that affect our hormone system. Science-backed highest impact moves are the morning routine reset. Store your toiletries outside the shower when not in use. Actually, sometimes what I do is I hide it behind the shower lining because it's a lot less hot than within that shower lining cubicle. But if you have a larger bathroom and maybe a shelf nearby, putting it clearly out of the shower area can help. And perhaps don't take super long showers because that can, of course, make the entire bathroom hot and leads to the same chemical leaching from the plastic bottles into your liquid toiletries. And on that note, you can switch to solid products where possible. So like bar soap, shampoo bars. If you're using liquid products, opt for those in glass or aluminum containers. The reason for this is twofold. First of all, a lot of liquid products have emulsifiers and other products to help it stay liquid in a pleasing homogeneous way. The solid soaps and shampoos avoid that problem. And secondly, obviously the solid versions don't have any plastic encasing it usually, so then it's not going to leach all of those chemicals from a plastic container. Quick hack is to choose fragrance-free options because we now know that fragrances often contain unlisted phthalates and other endocrine disruptors. Another high impact move is the kitchen cleanup. Research shows that there's a connection between food packaging and endocrine disruptor exposure. So priority moves are to transfer your takeout food to glass or ceramic immediately. I know I used to, because I was so busy, get a lot of delivery and it always gets sent to you in those black plastic containers. And those are terrible for you. There's a lot of toxins. There's flame retardants due to the mixing of plastics in the way that they're produced. So you want to get them out as soon as possible. It's also made me actually really suspicious of rotisserie chicken because rotisserie chicken, I love rotisserie chicken. Tastes so good. It's so convenient. However, they're usually stored on these hot plates with that dark plastic at the bottom. And I realized one day, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're leaching some of the worst chemicals into your food directly, and it's sitting there all day long. Whenever possible, just transfer whatever food you can, especially if it's hot, to something that is not plastic. And on that note, I recommend replacing all of your plastic food storage with glass, especially for things that are hot or fatty. So fats can also absorb chemicals from plastics just because of the chemical composition. For water bottles and for other liquid thermoses, use stainless steel or glass wherever possible. I know it's really hard sometimes, especially for the mouthpiece, to get a completely stainless steel or glass version, but do your best. And if it's just one part of it, that's better than the whole thing. Choose fresh or frozen over canned foods where possible. The lining of cans has notoriously contained BPA, and now we have substitutes which hopefully are better, but we just don't know. Another really great high impact low hanging fruit is daily detox support. Like I mentioned, we can't avoid everything in our environment, and you'll stress yourself too much if you're trying to avoid every single exposure possible. However, there are some scientifically backed strategies. Turns out that regular hand washing can reduce phthalate exposure by up to 30% in certain studies. So wash your hands. And opening windows for 10 minutes daily can also help, unless you're like me and you live in an urban city. But if you live in a place that is relatively free of outdoor pollution, this could be a quick and easy strategy and can get you fresh air. Indoor air typically has 2 to 5 times more endocrine disruptors just due to the accumulation of everything in the dust that we mentioned. Also, when you're buying new clothes, pre-wash them yourself or buy pre-washed clothing because that reduces transdermal uptake of chemicals. Studies actually show a direct effect of this. So it is really important. I know for me, I always naturally did this because I used to like try on clothes at the store and even that would irritate my eyes. So I was particularly sensitive to these chemicals. So I always insisted on washing clothes immediately. I didn't even want them near me before then. You'll notice that this happens more with unfortunately cheaper clothes because they aren't processed the same way. Sometimes if you buy nicer clothing, it's either pre-washed or free of these chemicals that are exposed to these clothes during factory manufacture. Also, keep your household as clean of dust as possible. So that is a major source of endocrine disruptor exposure. Vacuuming, having an air purifier, whatever you need to do to regularly get rid of your dust and also protect yourself if you're doing the cleaning, because obviously you don't want to kick up all this dust and then inhale it and consume it essentially and expose yourself directly to those endocrine disruptors. And also, if you're going out and shopping for new toiletries after listening to this, let me give you a framework so that you can make high impact moves. Based on the latest research, this is where to focus your attention and budget. The highest priority are personal care products that stay on your skin. This might be obvious, but when you're putting something directly on your skin, it's staying there all day long and getting absorbed and into your bloodstream, and it affects you for days and days and days, even after you've supposedly washed it off. Then second of all, we have food storage containers like we mentioned. So aim for those glass containers. I like glass, it's great. Water filters that remove endocrine disruptors are also a new thing that you can get these days. Use cleaning products that are simple and don't contain excess chemicals that might be endocrine disruptors, especially if you're using them in closed spaces. If you have to, open up your windows to allow all of those endocrine disruptors to escape. I know sometimes it's hard, especially if you have a cleaner coming in and they use products that maybe you wouldn't prefer. Medium priority are products that we have pretty good evidence for, but isn't quite as strong. Laundry products, air fresheners, shower curtains, and nonstick cookware. These are all things that I personally still focus on and I recommend my patients to when possible, but they come a little bit after the highest priority. So to get specific, just get fragrance-free and relatively simple laundry products where possible. Same thing for air fresheners. I actually don't love things like Febreze because they've got so many chemicals in it just to give you that supposedly fresh smell. If you need to use an air freshener, I prefer the zero type air fresheners that just negate bad smells rather than adding an extra new smell. Shower curtains are interesting because shower curtains are typically made of this soft plastic. And like we talked about in our showers, we're getting it all hot and steamy. So look at the research behind what shower curtains you're buying. Try to get the cleaner types of materials, although I know I mentioned it's sometimes really hard. Just do your best and take shorter hot showers if you have to. Cooler showers are great. And the nonstick cookware, this is an interesting one. I know there's a lot of stuff out there about like which nonstick is safe, which isn't. I prefer to be extra safe and I use something without a coating. My nonstick cookware is actually titanium. They use technology with certain engraving patterns so that things don't stick, and it really works. I can even fry my eggs on my no-coat nonstick cookware. This definitely exists. And finally, we have the slightly lower priority items because they have limited evidence. Occasional use items or products used outdoors or items that have really minimal skin contact, like your TV, for example. Obviously, TVs have plastic all over them, but you're not hugging them when they're on or anything like that, so it doesn't really matter so much. And of course, the most important thing, because we can't avoid all of these endocrine disruptors, is to support your body's natural defenses. Certain ways that you can do this, and I have entire other episodes talking about detoxification in a scientific way. Just to go over a few, eat cruciferous vegetables because they can enhance your detoxification pathways. Also, make sure you're getting adequate protein because that can support your liver function. I know, that's like an interesting one that most people don't know about. And regular movement helps eliminate certain compounds just through pure, regular blood circulation. Blood circulation is so important for your health and longevity, and I think people ignore this. It's part of the reason why living an active lifestyle matters so much. And then finally, of course, quality sleep optimizes your natural detox pathways. Make sure you're getting plenty of sleep, deep enough sleep, so that your body can rest and naturally detox. Small note, you want to be careful about what materials your mattress is made out of. You're sleeping on that a third of your day. So here's what I tell my patients. Think about reducing endocrine disruptor exposure, like improving your diet. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be better than you were before. Start with the changes that give you the biggest bang for your buck. Move those toiletries out of the shower, switch one personal care product to a safer alternative, and replace your plastic food storage with glass. Maybe consider a water filter. But the goal isn't to achieve zero exposure because that is virtually impossible in our modern world. It's just to make these strategic reductions where science shows it matters most. Focus on progress, not perfection, and let the latest research guide your choices rather than fear or marketing claims. As a quick note, I know some of you out there are worried about testing. Unfortunately, this is an area that's not easily accessible yet. There are no comprehensive endocrine disruptor tests out there, and I argue that they wouldn't be super practical anyways. Your doctor could order you a specific panel for a specialized lab, but I can already tell you that you will have endocrine disruptors in your blood or urine just based on the studies I mentioned earlier in the episode. Remember, 100% of people tested had flame retardants in their body. Rather than try and get tested, I suggest you aim for the lowest hanging fruit like we mentioned. And as I promised, I'm going to give you a few key takeaways to help make this easier for you. First, spot the 3 big hidden factors. So remember I said there are 3 big factors you were probably already exposed to this morning. First, plastics, like that disposable coffee cup lid or a plastic water bottle. And then 2, fragrances, scented lotions, air fresheners, body washes, anything with the flowery or artificial scent, even certain natural scents you want to be careful of. And then 3, heat and humidity speed up chemical release. Shower steam, microwave plastic containers, you name it. Plastics, fragrances, heat, and humidity. The key is to recognize these everyday sources of endocrine disruptor amplifiers so you can minimize contact. Look for small but high impact changes, like switching to glass, stainless steel, or fragrance-free options. And then 2, remember, timing versus dose. So your morning routine might matter more than your other routines because your hormone receptors are more sensitive at certain times of the day. You want to make sure that your shower and skincare routine in the morning isn't filled with endocrine disruptors, because that's just when your cortisol peak is trying to set your daily rhythm. Store your personal care products outside the shower or a heated place and switch to solid, low plastic alternatives to reduce your heat-based chemical leaching. And then finally, here's a quick 3-tier protocol just to quickly review. Whether you have a few minutes or a couple of months to overhaul your routine, there's an approach for you. If you have just 10 minutes, remove and replace. Get rid of those plastic bottles, grab glass or stainless steel for your water bottle, open your windows for 10 minutes to reduce the indoor air pollutants. If you have a few days and you want to put a little bit more effort, switch all your stuff to fragrance-free essentials and maybe use solid soaps or shampoos. And cook and store smarter. Transfer everything to glass and ceramic as soon as possible and avoid microwaving in plastic, and choose fresh and frozen over canned. And finally, if you are dedicated to living a cleaner from endocrine disruptor life, invest in a water filter proven to reduce PFAS, heavy metals, and other endocrine disruptors. Upgrade your home environment to replace older nonstick pans with safer cookware and opt for air purifiers in high traffic rooms. And finally, support your detox pathways. Prioritize those cruciferous veggies, adequate protein, regular exercise, and good sleep. Remember, ignore the marketing hype. Even if something says BPA free, and I love this one, I've seen no BPA added. I was like, what does that even mean? That is just fluff. off. Just ignore it. Use your common sense. Avoid the plastics, avoid the heat, and avoid the fragrances. The take-home message is that awareness is your first offense. Timing can really amplify the effects, and there's something you can do whether you have 10 minutes or 10 months. I hope this episode has helped you understand why so many people experience these mysterious symptoms. By recognizing and reducing your exposure to hormone disruptors, you can fine-tune your body's orchestra and restore harmony to your endocrine system. Take these small steps and remember, progress over perfection.